worked with.
Right.
So now let me ask you a tricky question. You all in the Milwaukee Symphony, I believe, were the first to have archival recordings on iTunes.
Right.
And now the LA Philharmonic and the New York Philharmonic have some, and these have proved to be bestsellers, some of them on iTunes.
Some of them done pretty well, yeah.
And yours perhaps were not.
No, not
is
the
this
same way.
something? Is this something that you all at the Milwaukee Symphony, the musicians, can be concerned about? Do you go to management and say, how come we didn't do better?
It hasn't happened yet, and I'm not sure it will. I think one of the interesting things about media, and it's always been the case, but I think it's more the case now, is that it means very different things to different orchestras. It's not any surprise to me, or I don't think it should be to anybody, that the New York Phil is going to sell more on iTunes than we did. They haven't sold nearly as much, my understanding, as the LSO has, but the LSO has got much more content up and has been at it longer. Fact is, the New York Phil
LSO being the London
Symphony
Symphony.
Orchestra.
Yeah.
And they were really the first to
Yeah.
do this. The New York Phil, the LA Phil, they've got a bigger audience base. They've got a bigger local market. Even in the CD days, orchestras largely sold to their local market. Even when it was, a big company, many of the sales were coming from their local market.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
Makes sense, too.
It does. I think what's happening, and the vision I have of our being on the internet, is that we're going to use it to intensify the relationship between us and our audience and our donors. It's not primarily about selling thousands of copies of something to people in France, although I understand that we've actually done quite well on iTunes France for some reason. Maybe we're going to be the Jerry Lewis of American orchestras, who knows. But, it's not, I don't think it's a competition between us and the New York Phil.
And realistically, and I can say this with a very good conscience because, as you know, I was in Milwaukee doing your Brahms Festival, doing some pre-concert lectures, and I heard you all play, and you were terrific.
It's a good orchestra.
Those were very impressive
good orchestra, yeah.
concerts. But even so, you just don't have the media clout of a New York Philharmonic or an LA Philharmonic. They also had a major record label behind them that was marketing very heavily on iTunes, which is a fascinating story in itself because Universal, the record label involved here, is the only classical music institution I know of that has really figured out a couple of things about marketing to a younger audience. They actually have MySpace.com pages for some of their classical stars. So they were the right ones to be with. So obviously you will never be in a position that a New York Philharmonic can be in, but the local stuff is really crucial.
We don't need to be.
Yeah, because you're not selling to that audience.
And also, one of the things I think will happen is that, one of the most exciting things that happened with the launch was that a world premiere we had done 3 weeks before was part of the launch. This is a way of getting new music up, unusual music up quickly, and making it available in a way that traditional distribution never could. Because we do not have to ship a copy of Roberto Sierra Third Symphony of a CD to every record store in France for everybody in France to have access to it now. I think the most interesting thing about the internet is that a lot of the resource and a lot of the bottlenecks that have been traditional obstacles to orchestras being distributed in the past are gone. When in the LP days, one of the main bottlenecks, I understand, was actually the pressing plants. There weren't very many pressing plants. There was a real capacity constraint. With CDs, that kind of went away. Then it became a distribution constraint. Now there's neither. There's not a distribution constraint. There's not a capacity constraint. The biggest problem may be in 5 years that there's so much product out there that there's no way of navigating through it. It may be that that's where the curatorial function comes back into it.
It does, but this is where the local side of it becomes crucial. You all are the Milwaukee Symphony. You function in Milwaukee. You try to interest people in Milwaukee. And now the fact that they can go on your site and hear music and go on iTunes and hear your music becomes really crucial.
And the thing we're up to now is we're starting our own store, online store, which we can do and still sell on iTunes.
Right.
So that instead of just selling a piece to somebody on iTunes, we don't know anything about that person. We can sell a piece to somebody, and if they're in Milwaukee, we can know about that.
Yes, you have their email address.
If they bought Mozart, we can say, we're doing Mozart next week. You want to come? We can reward subscribers. We can reward donors.
So is this the kind of thing that you get involved with
Yes,
in wearing your
absolutely.
various hats?
Well, actually, most of this is something that our Internet Oversight Committee is looking at, again, collaborating.
You're talking about the one in the Milwaukee Symphony.
Right. And it's one of the things, maybe the most important lesson I've learned over these many years of activism, is that activists and innovative institutions lead by example. That it's one thing to put up an internet agreement, and we did, and it was an innovative agreement, it was an important step, but nobody used it until all the pieces came together for us. Really 2 or 3 years after anyone else could have done it. All the pieces came together for us and we jumped on it. And that was a door we could have walked through 2 years before, and so could LA and New York and about 10 other orchestras. We just happened to have all the pieces in place. But that, that may have had more impact on the field than it probably did, than anything I did as ICSOM chair, or, and yet, those positions are important too, but the field needs pushing from the grassroots.
Absolutely, and especially now that that's become a factor in culture nationally.
Right.
I think the internet plays a big role because anybody can put something up on the internet. Mm-hmm. And now you have companies asking their customers to make commercials for them. But here we are talking about some new marketing initiatives the Milwaukee Symphony can take. Let's put this stuff on the web ourselves, right, so we harvest email addresses and musical preferences from people who we would like to contact and tell to come to our concerts. Who suggests that in the course of these discussions? Traditionally, you would be playing your viola, and the marketing director in his or her office would be coming up with a plan like that, and probably not even holding a meeting to tell you about it. But well, now I think things are moving much more fluidly.
Well, they are, but it's, again, it's a question of initiatives needing champions. 30 years ago, there was a bassoonist in Detroit, a guy named Paul Ganson, who became the champion of the idea of taking Orchestra Hall, which at the time was this rat-infested, filled with pigeon-dropping, basically empty, half-open box, and turning it back into a hall. And it was more his initiative than anybody else's that probably made that happen. I mean, one of the things I think about musicians that, I won't say annoys me, but exasperates me, is that we're trained to be very passive. We're trained to sit there and wait for the conductor to start and stop and tell us when we can get up and sit down. And I think that really does take a psychological toll on people. That article that we were talking about was largely about that.
This is an article that...
it was Harmony. It's on the Polyphonic website. The title of the article was Why They're Not Smiling, and it was an exploration of...
An article by you.
By my father and me.
By your father and you.
My father,
and your father was...
My father was one of the founders of the field of developmental psychobiology and did a lot of the early work on theoretical work and experimental work on stress. And our theory was Seymour Levine.
Okay.
He's a professor emeritus at Stanford University. He's currently at UC Davis. At the age of 80, he's still working.
Good for him.
Which is something I dream about, not being 80, but working at that point. And the theory we had was that the problem with being an orchestra musician was you had training and talent and intelligence and drive, but no control over your environment. And it turns out actually there's tons of experimental and anecdotal work to demonstrate how harmful that is, both psychologically and even physiologically. To take a very simple example, some studies done in nursing homes show that people that, for example, that have the chore or are given plants to water and take care of, die at about half the rate of people that don't. Just even that level of control. There was a classic experiment, which was my favorite, of people exposed to what they called noxious noise, which actually was jet engine noise. And they were given, one group of people was just exposed to this noise, and the other group of people was exposed to it, and they were given a knob that they were told would control it.